everyone. Rabbi Sarah Berman needs no introduction to any of you, but I am going to take the pleasure of introducing her because this is the third. Oh my goodness, this light. It's the third in this series, but we've also had Slichot on Saturday night. I'm not sure who of you were there. So this is the fourth of our Elul preparing for forgiveness programs, and we're right around the corner to Rosh Hashanah. So we're happy to have such a robust community on Zoom. We're thrilled to have you all here in person, and it's a joy to learn tonight with Rabbi Sarah Berman.
Thank you, Shira. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here in body, in face. We're so glad to be here with everybody this evening. Now, our series this Elul, our series this final month of the Jewish year, has brought us into different ideas, different themes, and different learnings that will prepare us for growth in this new year. Healing can feel very hard right now because we are so broken, we are in so much pain. But what we can hope for and what we can come together around is seeking some kind of growth, even in this time of real discomfort, of real loss, of real pain. Today we're going to look at the rituals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, rituals that involve our bodies, that take us beyond the words, beyond the music, and into what we are asked physically to bring to our process of forgiveness and of healing during the High Holy Days. We recognize that not all of these rituals are actually made for our bodies. And so that's going to be part of our conversation tonight, not something that we put an asterisk on and not talk about. That is exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. And so I hope that everybody has our text sheet in front of you. And online, I believe that everybody has the text sheet as well. Thank you, Rabbi Andrew Kaplan-Mandel, our teammate in the Zoom room. So tonight we are going to study 3 embodied practices. We're going to study chest beating, what we do during our confession of sins, during our vidui. We are going to study full prostration, the laying down of our bodies on the ground that we do during Rosh Hashanah, during the shofar service, the great Aleinu. I will fully prostrate. I will do that up on the stage, but that's all I'm going to do on the stage this evening. And the third practice, which may be the hardest for the most people or the least meaningful for the most people, is fasting. So we're going to talk about each of these 3 rituals. We're going to talk about these 3 embodied practices. We're going to talk about where they come from in our tradition. We're going to talk about the spiritual place that each one of these practices brings us into. And then we're finally going to talk about what we can do to enter that spiritual place, even if we don't hit ourselves, even if we don't lay our bodies on the ground, even if we don't fast. So I'm going to start with one of the texts on our text sheet. No, we're going to talk about an opening discussion first. So I've given a little bit of an introduction about what we're talking about tonight, but all of this is circling around the idea of Teshuvah, of return, of repentance. So I'd like to begin by asking you in our Zoom room and in our physical room, in the Zoom room indicating your interest by using the raise hand function, and here in the physical room by raising an actual hand. I want to ask, for you, what is Teshuvah? What is the process, the goal of this season for you? Monica, I saw you immediately gesturing. Did you want to answer, or were you just readjusting? Okay.
I was just readjusting, but for me, I just think of the year. I look at my calendar and the months and think of the good things and the bad things and what I need to ask forgiveness for and what I hope to achieve in the next year.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty complete definition of Teshuvah. So I want to take Linda's response from our Zoom room and then come over to Nancy Hannah, and then I'm going to ask the follow-up question. So Linda.
What this all means for me is that it's a spiritual cleansing and a way to start a new year fresh.
It's fresh, it's cleansing, it's a renewal, it's a new start. That kind of return that you can't ever wipe a slate clean, but you can find a new starting point based on where you are now. Nancy Hannah.
Well, I was so impressed by the Parsha from last week with the whole idea of stories. And for me, it's a question of communication and hearing the story of whatever has happened during the past 12 months and adding information and talking and communicating. I don't really think of it as forgiveness.
What you're really talking about or pointing us towards is growth. It's a replanting and maybe a flowering anew. So during this season, we do use our bodies in our prayer, in our rituals. How does using your body during prayer, whether it's on a Friday night and you're bending your knees and bowing, or a Saturday morning and you're lifting up on your toe? Oh God, I took a walk on the beach this weekend. My calves do not want to lift up. I need to find another way to do that. So we use our bodies in order to bring prayer through our whole selves. For you during the High Holy Days, we've named 3 examples, but what does it feel like to use your whole body in prayer during the High Holy Days? What spiritual state does that bring you into? Or how is it different from reading words on a page? Is it different from reading words on a page? Barbara.
Hi. Thanks. I think when your body is engaged, it's a bit like yoga and meditation, that the whole of you becomes engaged. To me, that becomes more spiritual. I let myself go into it.
It's mind, body, but what you're describing, meditation and yoga, are done without words. So it's almost in parallel, but separate. It's not the same as using words. Any other thoughts about what it feels like to use your body in addition to or instead of words on the page? All right.
Well, I'll just talk about fasting. I feel that, first of all, it's very unusual. I only do it once a year. And it makes me feel somehow cleansed and somehow pure and somehow, different, as if this is really something special. So that's the spiritual part. Do you mind handing it back to Mark?
In general, for me, using my body, say, shuckling, the Yiddish word, shaking during prayer, that's what my father did. I mean, that's my background. And so I feel a communion in community in that regard, communion, and being part of something that goes on through the generations. The words do that as well, but this then matches the words and the movement match together.
I don't want to make too much of a difference between, language and body, but I guess I do at the same time, that doing something physically is literally an enactment, and that kind of enactment is what we seek to take forward with the holidays. I think that prayer can also be an enactment, but the physicalization of something is its own special thing.
What just comes to me is awareness. All right. What comes to me is awareness. By having my body, it makes me more aware of what I'm doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
An awareness that it goes beyond the mind. It's the mind-body connection that that Barbara was pointing us to. And one more comment on this side from Nancy, and I'll bring mine over.
Thank you. I think for many of us, we think about, being trapped in our heads and living in our heads and making some sort of a physical commitment to, during the holidays, of thinking differently and engaging differently, maybe gets you out of the trap a little bit.
I like the idea of escaping a trap, which is also a physical experience. Helene in our Zoom room, who has been very patient. Helene, did you still want to share a comment?
And now, okay.
Perfect.
Okay. It was interesting that someone brought up fasting also, and Teshuvah. When you first mentioned using your body, it makes it bigger. Like the way we sing with Angela, there's more, there's closeness with fasting. I read recently where there's discipline through fasting, and it also brings us closer to God because we don't have the distraction. And I'm also thinking, therefore, of gratitude. It's one thing when it's sort of in your mind, when you can bring it into your heart and soul, and that's the Teshuvah you're talking about that comes when you are using your body, and you're feeling it so completely rather than just in your mind, and knowing that God is working through you, for you, in you, around you, totality of it. And that's what I mean by bigger.
Yeah. Helene, that's an incredibly poetic response and interpretation, but I'm also really taken with, words on the page we can think about, but we are doing something with our bodies in order to create this teshuvah for ourselves when we do an embodied ritual. And Helene, that's just so sublime. Thank you. So I want to take us into some of these practices and what it feels like in our bodies to do them, but also where these practices came from and why we do them. So I'm going to look for 3 readers to read to us about beating our chests. I would love to start here in our physical room. Ron, I'm going to ask you to read first, and then I'm going to ask you to hand it to Freddie if you don't mind, and then Jean, if you wouldn't mind reading out loud. Do you mind? Okay, so Fred, the first text, Ron the first text, Freddie the second text, Jean the third.
Beating our chests, hate evil and love good, and establish justice in the gate. Perhaps Adonai, the God of hosts, will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. Assuredly, thus said Adonai, the sovereign, the God of hosts. In every square there shall be lamenting. In every street cries of ah, woe. And the farmhand shall be called to mourn, and those skilled in wailing to beat their chests.
All right, so. All right, please, Freddie.
David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and so did all the men with him. They beat their chests and wept, and they fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the soldiers of God and the house of Israel who had fallen by the sword.
And Jean.
A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven. A time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for beating chests and a time for dancing.
Excellent. Thank you so much, all three of you. So these are three different reasons, three different occasions for beating our chests. One is a time of fearing God's punishment, so fear of God. The second is in mourning. And the third is in mourning, but not forever. So each of these three reasons, each of these three moments, contexts in which we are demonstrated, our ancient ancestors demonstrate a need for this action. What emotional states are they encountering? And how does the action either reveal that emotional state or somehow deepen it? How do you read the connection between the emotional state and the action? Helene, I see your hand is back up. We'd love to hear from you.
I hate to be so innocent in my thinking, but can you give me a definition for Teshuvah?
Teshuvah is from the same verb as to return. So it's a return, it's repentance, but it's also a return to what we know to be the right path. It's a return to our best selves. Great. Thanks, Helene. All right, so with beating our chests, the connection between the action and the emotional state that it connects to, how do you see the connection there? Is one causing the other? Is one deepening the other? What's going on here? Great. Monica.
It's reminding us of those things and making us feel them viscerally by beating our chest, so that it's not just like you're saying the thing, but in a way, it's like a physical punishment of yourself to remind yourself.
I mean, there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between I'm so sad and why is this happening to me? I can't believe I've lost this person. There's a difference to how it feels to say those words. I'm so sad, and I'm so sad.
It makes it communal. It's symbolic. It's almost like speech, except it's symbolic speech. And it makes that feeling shared. It makes that feeling communal. That's how I feel about it.
How does it make it communal?
Because you can't know what I'm feeling if I don't share it in some way. And if I'm beating my chest, you know that I'm experiencing some kind of emotion. And so it becomes a shared thing. And when the community does it all together, it's very powerful.
And we see that happening all together with David and his men, mourning for their friend, their comrade in arms, Jonathan. They're all doing this together. I'm looking for hands in the Zoom room in case anybody has thoughts that they would like to share aloud with our community. I'm looking here in our physical room as well. There we go.
Well, I'm a big crier, so I actually don't feel this communal thing with beating the chest. I don't feel it as emotional. Tears, I feel as a deep connection to God. And that's what I'm trying to do, which I sort of feel goes not, I love this idea of wailing. And I see the beating of the chest as a very forgive me, male type of thing, and I see wailing or weeping as a much more feminine sort of action. And
So these actions in our tradition aren't gendered. One is not associated with women and the other with men. They're both associated with all peoples. And in our prayer rituals as well, the idea of wailing as part of mourning is associated with men and women. And in our prayer, beating of the chests, it's not told that the men of our congregation do that as we confess. It is we all stand, whatever our gender. And so I want to explore a little bit, just a little bit, about your experience of beating your chest. When you recite Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Dofi, when you recite our alphabet of sins, what does it bring up for you? What do you feel with each time you pound your chest? Barbara and Evan. Barbara or Evan? Evan? Barbara?
I'm sorry, when
Evan.
I was saying the last point, I'm wondering aloud whether it's also getting God's attention when I pound my chest. That's signaling that I want God to pay attention also.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the prophet Amos is pointing us to, that these were people in fear of God, and the way they called God's attention to them in a good way as opposed to a way deserving of punishment was beating their chests. That's exactly what Amos is pointing us to, Evan. So when you do this, what do you feel?
Just back to the other thing, I think the reason we say them all together, we say the sins together and beat our chest, is also to get you to remind yourself that you have done that, because a lot of people might not be as inclined to admit they've done some of the bad things. And if we all do it together, it's easier to admit it, or at least to try to face it than not. But for the other thing, for this, I think the alphabet thing is categories. And that's how I think of it when we do tashlich. Like I do categories like the sins you did, where you hurt somebody in X category. If it was you weren't empathetic, or I think of it of different emotional stages.
Interesting. And each one of those letters, each time you make contact, it almost restarts the clock. It gives you another thing to think about. It's punctuation. Love that.
When I do that, it feels like I'm punishing myself for each of these sins that perhaps I did commit knowingly or unknowingly. But that to me has a totally different feel from mourning. I think mourning, I don't feel that it's a sense of grief. I feel that it's more a sense of, it's some kind of punishment for bad things.
Well, and that's the challenge in particular of this ritual, that it is associated with mourning and it is associated with sins of repentance. But is there a connection between the two? Not necessarily. Just because we do the same action doesn't mean that they are connected thematically. Ron.
So for me, is this on?
Yep.
It's a reminder, and we said punctuation, and so I was thinking very much of an exclamation point. And the other thing that I was going to say earlier, which is slightly related, but it has to do with the whole concept of community. People have said this, and being together and doing this together and being reminded that these are things that we may individually be responsible for, to finding our better selves, but we're not alone. And just take as an example, if we're in Geffen Hall as one example, there's such a large amount of people that come together at this for these services, and we're part of something big, meaningful, important, exclamation point.
We are. Deb, in our Zoom room.
I realized from somebody that you and I both know in Seattle a couple of years ago, instead of doing it in a conference, to do a more, just a touch or a circular. Maybe they don't need to be up, but they help.
I'm going to repeat.
Think more being that anyway for that.
So when we hit ourselves, it's like we're beating ourselves up. But if we choose to do kind of a pat, a soothing motion, that it can be more productive, it can be more positive. Angela has taught, Rabbi Buchtal has taught, that we shouldn't think of the beating on our breast as a beating ourselves up, but think of it as if these are paddles to restart our hearts, restart our empathy, restart our emotional engagement with the world that can be so damaging, that can be so unproductive, that can be so painful. So what if we restarted our hearts? But I also recognize that we're not all able to or interested in hitting ourselves on the chest when we come to these moments of prayer. And so part of our conversation towards the end of this session is going to circle around other opportunities we have, other alternatives that we have to beating our chests in anguish or in repentance. So Deb has just pointed us towards the first option, which is kind of a pat, a soothing gesture. We have two more practices to get to, so I am going to move us along here. It's not that I don't want to hear everybody's comments; they're going to be amazing, but we do need to move to our next ritual. So we are going to shift to prostration. Now, we're going to read the texts that tell us where prostration comes from in our tradition, in our texts. But before we do that, I did say I'd come up here once, just to remind us what we're talking about during the High Holy Days. As we enter our shofar service on Rosh Hashanah, we are invited to think about the world to come, about a great world that is ahead of us, as these gates of repentance, as the gates of heaven are opening to us at the beginning of our holidays. We are invited to express our devotion to God and how small we are as humans before the power of the Heavenly One. And so instead of our Aleinu L'Shabeach inviting us to bend our knees and bend forward, as we do on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, on Rosh Hashanah morning, we are invited to bend all the way down and lower ourselves completely to the ground in those same lines in the Aleinu. And then somehow we have to get ourselves back up. Yoga has helped so much. But I also want to recognize that many of us didn't grow up with this tradition, and many of our bodies, at whatever age we are, whatever ability we have, this is not something that many of our bodies will allow us to do. And so let's think about where this tradition came from. And then as we move through our conversation, we'll also land again at what we might be able to do differently to elicit that same feeling. So where does this tradition come from? For prostration, we have a text from Exodus, one from Deuteronomy, and one from Genesis, each pointing us towards a different emotional state. I wonder if we have anybody in the Zoom room who might want to read for us. So I'm going to just see if maybe, Joan, would you be willing to read for us? Your hand is still raised, so I'm wondering if you'd read Exodus. We need to get you off of mute, though. Wonderful. Oh, you don't have it in front of you. So we're going to get a different reader for this text, but Rabbi Mandel is going to post the text again to you so that you can follow along with us. I'll look to my physical room here. If there are 3 folks in a row who might be willing to read these texts, great.
Then God said to Moses, "Come up to Adonai with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Moses shall come near Adonai, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him."
Okay. Audrey.
Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, Adonai, have given me. You shall leave it before your God Adonai, and bow low before your God Adonai. And you shall enjoy, together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst, all the bounty that your God Adonai has bestowed upon you and your household.
Yes. All right. Susan.
Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming with a retinue of 400. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground several times until he was near his brother Esau, ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept.
So 3 very different emotional experiences, all associated with bowing low to the ground. How would you define each of these 3 emotional experiences? What are these scenes telling us?
The Exodus one is highly ritualized.
Yeah.
It's what humans or what Israel owes God. And
Yes.
so it's through their leader. It's not a shared emotion.
Yeah, it's deference for a God who is above and beyond. Right? It is like the prostration of Rosh Hashanah. How small can we get before the greatness of God?
So, hi. Yes, I guess I'll address the second one, which I thought was in thanks for the bounty that God has bestowed.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a thank you.
Yeah. It's a thank you. It's a gratitude. It's coming from a place of love as opposed to a place of fear. Oh, Mike is over your right hand.
I have to confess that the whole idea of prostrating yourself is so foreign to me.
Oh, we're going to come to that as soon as we have defined all 3 of these texts.
Oh.
Okay, so just hold on to the mic and hold on to the comment. Okay. Let's just make sure we're all on the same page about what each of these 3 texts mean.
Okay.
One is about fear of deference to God. One is about gratitude for God's largesse. The third text has nothing to do with God. The third text is what? People to people. It's personal. Is it fear? Is it love? Is it somewhere in between? Is it yirah, awesomeness, which could be scary or could be really, really deeply rooted in our hearts? So, all right, now let's talk about how it lands on you.
It feels not only weird, it feels to me kind of antithetical to the whole idea of, as Jews, we are taught, we even argue with God. We question, we're always seeking, we're curious. And it's the idea of prostrating oneself to make oneself less and small and very different from the godliness, whatever it is you may think of as being God, just feels very weird. And it may just be that it was never part of my experience until recently.
Yeah. Well, I get to say my very favorite phrase right now, which is, we are and people, not or people. So, yes, God is so near. God is not remote. God is someone we can wrestle with and argue with. God is also the infinite, the Ein Sof, the most powerful being that calls the rest of creation into existence. And so we are so small. We are nothing in the face of God. So how do we convey that? By making ourselves even smaller. So we have all of these ands that are before us. And the wonderful thing about Reform Judaism is that we get to choose our and. We get to choose where we are, which God is ours. Ruth. And then to Joan in our Zoom room, and then I think that's whose hand is up.
Biologists, can people hear me? Biologists who study animal behavior see prostration and certain other gestures that animals do to one another as signaling that you have no aggressive intentions toward the other.
And many of us who have dogs have seen that, right? Many of us who have cats see them bowing down, and it has nothing to do with our power over them, nothing at all. So I saw Joan in the Zoom room, and then we're going to come over to Barbara.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the beating of the chest. I've always had a very hard time with that idea, especially reading all the things that I couldn't relate to at all. So one year I decided, and I also had a yoga background as a teacher and also many years practicing, I decided that I would find a different gesture that related to the heart. And I decided instead of beating the chest, that I would gently brush my chest each time I said something to sort of brush away the energy of that sin, to brush away the impact of that. If I've been exposed to it, if someone else did it, or if it's happened in the world, and just to be able to release it rather than, the idea of beating myself. I feel that has been very helpful.
So, Joan, you're ready for our final conversations after we've read all of these texts, when we talk about the ways that we can rethink these rituals to make them better fit who we are and what we value. So you're racing ahead, but we're going to meet you there soon. Barbara.
So in the yes and, I've learned that from you. I was thinking about my approach to it. And the way I saw it is that I'm in awe, and I want to open up to this awe, and it is powerful. And it's part of this idea of connecting with your ancestors and going through these ritualistic movements and connecting them with what you're feeling. And I thought of it from that perspective.
Awe in Judaism, yirah or norah, has two valences. A valence of awe that comes with a tinge of fear, an awe that is completely surrounded by love. And that's what you're saying. It is both meaning. There's a reason in Hebrew that it's the same word. In English, there isn't the same. We don't have the perfect translation, but yirah is both. And that's what you're pointing us towards. So I want to know if prostrating, either the small version, like during Aleinu on a Friday or a Saturday that you maybe even haven't thought about before, does that bring you into any kind of emotional state? And if you have done the full prostration, how does that impact your spiritual or emotional experience? Nobody has any feelings about bowing. That's fine. We can move on. Nancy.
Thank you. I grew up where we were the only Jewish family as far as you could see. And going to church with friends and seeing lots of bowing and kneeling and so forth always made me uncomfortable because we were told we don't do that. So even for Aleinu, I do it, but I immediately think of my rabbi as a child saying, even though we did Aleinu then, we don't really bow. We don't really bow. So I understand the tradition and so forth, but it never quite sits comfortably with me.
also think the prostration is very weird. When you were talking, I was thinking of everybody bowing in front of Yul Brenner in The King of I. And and what I believe is that God is in us. We're all God-like. And if I'm God-like and I'm so close to God, why do I have to bend? Why do I have to bow? God doesn't really want me to bend and bow.
I'm going to take the mic because if God doesn't want you to bend and bow, if it's not actually about God's desires, what does our bending and bowing say about us in relation to God? What is the relationship we are creating for ourselves with God when we choose to bend and bow? It's not the God that we argue with. It's not the God that is my friend who sits next to me. This is a different God that we are creating for ourselves each time we do this. All right, so we have one more practice to read about before we move into our conversation of how can we create these emotional and spiritual experiences for ourselves even when we choose not to or cannot beat our chests, fully prostrate ourselves on the ground, and our third ritual is fasting. So let's move into fasting. And I wonder if Rabbi Mandel, if you would be willing to read our first text on fasting, and if you see any likely folks in the Zoom room to ask to read the other two texts.
I'm happy to do that, and I'll put the text in addition to the link. I'll put the actual text in the chat.
You're the best.
For people to follow along with.
Thank you.
Our first text is from Leviticus chapter 16. It says, "And this shall be to you a law for all time. The 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial, and you shall do no manner of work, neither the citizen nor the alien who resides among you. For on this day of atonement shall be made for you to purify you of all your sins. You shall be pure before Adonai. It shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial. It is a law for all time."
Amazing.
So let us invite Phyllis Schoenberg. Would you be willing to read the next text? I'm going to put it in the chat.
I will be happy to. I have it on paper also.
Excellent.
Yeah, okay.
It's the Esther text.
"And Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish." So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him.
Amazing. Rabbi Mandel, who shall we hear from for Zechariah?
Laura Kaplan, would you be willing to come up and read Zechariah for us? Put it in the chat.
Thus said Adonai, oath, the fast 4th month, the fast of 5th month, the fast 7th month, and the fast 10th month shall be occasions for joy, gladness, happy festivals to the house of the Lord. But you must love honesty and integrity.
Okay. Zoom friends, I'm very grateful to all of you for your readings. Thank you. And so these 3 texts point us towards, well, the first text, Leviticus, is telling us the fast of Yom Kippur. What we are doing, we are practicing self-denial for atonement, right? That's kind of what we go in assuming. The Esther text is communal fasting, fasting in support, in spiritual support of somebody who is placing herself in danger. Zechariah suggests that fasting is a source of joy and gladness. Are any of these spiritual and emotional states that you have been able to harness through fasting? Are these the spiritual and emotional states that fasting brings you to? So, it looks like Helene has another comment. Hooray, Helene.
I wasn't even thinking of speaking of this, but yes, it's so about humility and purity and all of what the Torah says, that God is Almighty, and that we can still have so much joy and love within ourselves, and do not have to think of all of these rituals as negative, and yet feel the timbrels within us.
Amen. Helene, thank you. Nancy Hannah.
I wish that, we could decide as a community what we are fasting for. I mean, when you think October 7th, it's so near, and if we could all fast for the hostages, that the power of a group fast, could really be significant, that there is power in everyone joining in something like fasting. And I like that idea.
So inspired by Esther, that fasting need not just be a person who's about to take an action. It can be a group's choice to make a statement. We saw in the civil rights movement, in political prisoners all over the world, the choice to go on a hunger fast, hunger strike, while incarcerated or while under detention. And so that idea that a person can take a stand through fasting is a political one, and maybe that's what Esther was looking at. But it can also be a spiritual choice. It can also be a spiritual commitment for a person or a community, and that's what you're pointing us towards.
What I mean is that the connection to a higher power by all of us joining together, it is connected to God, because it is through that cry to Adonai, that a group cry of fast, that we could accomplish something.
I'd like permission to turn the tables and ask you a question. So which of these fasts would be appropriate if, say, we in our own time felt what Thomas Jefferson in his time felt when he said in response to the issue of slavery really becoming uncontrollable, he said, "I fear for the future of the Republic." Which fast is appropriate to that?
What kind of fast is appropriate to ensuring a different future?
To responding to that fear.
Well, responding to our moment is really what all of these fasts are doing. It's just, is the valence of that joyful? Is the valence of that atonement? Is the valence of that communal? And I believe in the power of prayer to change us individually. I don't know that I believe in the power of prayer to change us societally, but I believe in communal action and its ability to change society. So of the fasts, of the 3 limited examples that I gave you, the fast of a community in support of action, that's the fast that is the fast that I choose, if I may paraphrase our friend Isaiah. So I want us to have the opportunity tonight to learn from these 3 embodied practices what they each intend for us, what they create for us during the high holidays, and to consider how else we might attain that kind of spiritual or emotional state. Pounding our chests during our communal confession of sin is an action we do all together, and it's a rhythm that we create all together. You can hear the percussion in my voice. What would it look like if we chose another way? A smoothing, a comforting, a squeezing of another person's hand. How might we approach our communal confession of sin if it isn't pounding our chests? How can we, I'm going to ask 3 questions, and then we're going to actually go into smaller group discussions so that everybody has a chance to speak. So that's the question about beating our chests. For the prostration during the high holidays, the intention is to make us feel small in front of God, to remind us how small we are in the face of the power of God, of the universe, of this world. What else might we do with our bodies if not laying them down on the ground? How else might we convey that we are not all powerful in our world? And finally, with fasting, again, one of the hardest things for most of us to do to our bodies, and many of us don't do it because we can't. How else might we come into this place of communal observance? How else might we come into this place of potential joy? How else might we come into this place of teshuvah, of full repentance, of a desire to return to the right path, even more than the right path, a return to our best selves? And so, what else could we do is the question I'm asking you. And for the next, do we have 10 minutes? We're going to run over. I am going to give us about 8 minutes to speak to somebody near to us. Some of us came with somebody, many of us did not. I'm going to ask that you speak with somebody that you did not come here with. So that might mean turning around or moving to a different seat. It might mean being in a different Zoom room. Rabbi Mendel, if you want to break us out, and we'll come back. If you set your timer for 7 minutes, that gives the 1 minute countdown. All right, friends, I'm going to pull our attention back. I hope that these were interesting conversations, took you in maybe new directions. So I'd love to hear from folks. Did anybody come up with a new idea or just an alternative of what you could do that would be meaningful instead of pounding your chests? All right, I see an idea over here.
You know, this is to some extent in response to the discussion of whether or not this is a masculine or a feminine activity. I don't think of this as chest pounding. To me, chest pounding, and I said, do you remember the scene in King Kong where to me, that's chest pounding, and that's boastful, and that's self-congratulatory, and so forth. So I think this is the tradition, but I would be just as comfortable simply putting my hand over my heart, which is a promise in a million other situations where your hand is over your heart and you're saying, I'm going to do everything I can to do better. To me, that's more comfortable. I love this because this is the tradition I was raised with, and it's nice to be in the rhythm with the whole congregation. But in terms of what it means, I'd be more comfortable with my hand on my heart.
As a promise, like the Pledge of Allegiance, yep, or the national anthem, exactly. Kathy, in the Zoom room.
Reform Judaism is always evolving, and our little act of conversation, we may not be around for this, but the young people may want to add some kind of communal volunteer expression, something we do in community as a way of atoning, a way of creating joy. And for some people, the holidays can be dark side remembrance, and so one of our members mentioned they'd rather do something in community than necessarily something alone. So the rabbis that work with the younger members, this may be something that evolves over Reform Judaism with the next generation.
It might.
That's just a prediction.
Yeah. Kathy, thank you. One more on our chest beating from Ruth.
I think that one of the things that bothers me is that if we try to do something other than, in a sense, hurt ourselves or feel pain, we're not acknowledging what is actually the gravity of what is actually going on. And that only by acknowledging it, by kind of looking at it and going through it, can you really start to address it and find different resolutions. And I don't think that comforting yourself rather than hurting yourself is going to really do that.
Well, no apologies. But isn't it great that each of us can make that choice? That do I need to sit in a corner and think about what I've done? Do I need to be punished? Or do I need to make a promise, an awareness, an underscoring, this word, this sin, I am with it in this moment. I'm really kind of grounding myself in the reality of it. And can I do better? Yep. All of these are options to us. All right, let's think about prostration. Is there another action, another embodiment that more of our bodies might be able to do? Who spoke about prostration? I see that Niles Berman is at the top of the list right now, and I am going to put you on the spot. Did you think of anything as an alternative to prostration?
No, I was too slow to press the raise hand button or touching your heart or beating on your chest. I was only going to suggest that if a fundamental goal of the holiday is not just that introspection, but to ask forgiveness of those whom we may have wronged
I love that. And I'd been thinking of, squeezing a hand with each one of that's the communal, that's the doing it together. Thanks, Dad. So I am going to bring us back into prostration, because that is so difficult for so many of our bodies. And that moment is so dramatic in the service. That what is it that can bring us into that space of recognizing, if not that we are small and God is huge, simply recognizing that we are not the largest thing in the world. We are not the center of the world. That maybe we are one among many, which is an important place to be. What else might we do instead of prostrating?
Well, I think one thing we may do is close our eyes and visualize the prostration. The problem is that most of us don't do visualization unless you've been practicing something else like meditation. But I think, thinking about it in this way, I mean, it's, like when you close your eyes and you're concentrating during the Shema. I don't think you need to do that, but you can move into, especially because the clergy are doing it. And if they do it slowly, then people could really have a moment where they were visualizing themselves as that person is doing it.
So I love the idea of visualization being the mode. So what if we close our eyes and envision ourselves into the person, the body of another person who's doing this? What if we close our eyes and zoom out and out and out and out? What if closing our eyes isn't effective, on the page before us, finding one dot to focus on, to use as your gaze? Or what if we find an O on the page and focus into its center? There are so many ways that we can remind ourselves in this era of everyone out for themselves, this extreme individualism, borrowing a phrase from Rabbi Sivan Rothels. What if we saw ourselves as a part of a greater whole, of just as one element of this bigger world, and focused on one small piece of a greater whole to bring ourselves there? All right, and before we conclude, before everybody heads home, I know we've already run over, let's spend just 2 minutes thinking about fasting. What is something that we can do that is not fasting, that brings us into this sense of hyper-awareness about ourselves, hyper-awareness, really, of our bodies throughout the day of Yom Kippur? Carol.
Thank you very much. What I have to do, I can no longer fast. For the last 5 years or so, ever since I started taking all the medications that I have to take in the morning to survive the day, and I have to eat. So I go ahead on Yom Kippur and I have breakfast, I drink, I eat, I take all my pills, but to me, I do a modified fasting. After that, I can go to synagogue. I go to synagogue, and the next time I eat is at the break of the fast. And one other thing I have to add here is, growing up, I used to go to these huge break fast parties. And you know what now? It doesn't bother me to be by myself at home when I get home from synagogue and just have a nice quiet meal. And that's my Yom Kippur.
Any way that we modify our eating and drinking on that day makes us more aware. Just as kashrut on a daily basis, anybody who keeps some version of kosher, you have to be more aware of what you're eating, when you're eating it, and how you're eating it. Fasting, or a modified fast, helps us, invites us to be mindful as well. Well, keep the ideas coming. Send them to me. Send them to Rabbi Mandel if he's your primary contact. Send them to us in our survey that's going to go out after this program. I'm really grateful that we've been able to move through Elul, this season of preparation together. Thank you for showing up tonight. Thank you for showing up throughout this season. Thank you to my clergy colleagues who have been our wonderful teachers this season. And in a week, we will be able to say to each other, Shana Tova Umetuka. May it be a good year, a sweet year, a more healthy, a more peaceful year for us all. See you soon.